Hey there, it's Denise from LoomaHat.com, and this time the project is a holder for your glasses, and I am totally loving this as a gift for, say, your mom or your sister, your uncle, or during this global pandemic that we're in. How about for your favorite first responder as a thank you gift for their service? Now, to use it to hold a mask, you will need to add a few more rows, so just stay with me and I'll tell you later on in the video how to do that. Now, I use it mostly to hold my jewelry and my pin cushion, and I've even added a secret pocket in the back of it for some extra goodies. So if you want to add the pin cushion as well, I am going to give you a link in the description for the rib stitch flower video. Alright, get your 41 peg loom and 161 yards of your worsted weight yarn, your hook, needle, some scissors, and let's start with a drawstring cast on of those 41 pegs. We're going to be knitting using 2 strands of yarn as one. Go ahead and take those 2 strands and secure it to your anchor peg. And now we're going to take the yarn behind peg 1 right here. And you can go in either direction. I'm going to go from left to right and take the working yarn behind peg 1. Bring it in front of peg 2. Right here, and then take it behind peg 3 and bring it in front, and you're going to continue to do this zigzag with the working yarn. So in front, behind, and you continue to do, like I said, that zigzag like this with your working yarn until you're finished with all 41 pegs. Right, in and out, in and out, in and out. And here you're at peg 41, so you're behind peg 41, and now you're going to lay the working yarn loosely over the next few pegs, and that can be, 4, 5, 6 pegs, doesn't matter. Lay it over a few of the pegs, take it behind, and with your hand hold those 2 strands of yarn, and now with your hook you're going to knit off every peg that has loops on the top and on the bottom. So 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, and you're taking those bottom loops and you're going to knit them off the top. So then you take your working yarn and you're going to lay it over the existing loops loosely. You see that you have some in the front and some behind. So lay the working yarn over the next few, 4, 5, 6, whatever you can handle, and hold on to that working yarn, and then with your hook again, go back and knit the bottom loops over the top. And remember, again, this is every other peg that you're doing that, right? So then you take the working yarn, go to the next few, you're laying it loosely over the existing loops, and with the hook, you're knitting off every other peg. When you reach peg 41, you will notice that that peg does not have loops on the top and the bottom, and so you're basically done with your cast on and you're ready to move to the next part, which is over here on peg 1, where you're going to start rows 1 through 45, where all you're going to do is knit the row. So you're just knitting all 41 pegs. And for this part, we're going to be using the U-wrap version of the knit stitch. So you basically half wrap your peg and knit off. Again, you take the working yarn, you're going to half wrap the peg and knit off. So let me do that one more time so you notice. I'm half wrapping the peg, and then I take the bottom loops right here. We're going to take those 2 bottom loops over the top and knit off. You can also use the flat or the true, also known as the classic. Do not use the E-wrap because it's going to be way too loose. All right, and as you knit, going on to row 2 right here, you need 45. But as you continue to knit, I want to take the time to send a special thank you to Carol Maple from Promise Learning ATL, to Elise Bertrand, Penny Pitchard, and Kristen Stones for covering the cost of closed captioning. Alright guys, keep knitting. You need 45 rows. Quick reminder, after a couple of rows, 2 or 3, take the knot off the anchor peg because your yarn no longer needs to be secured. You're pretty good. Continue knitting your rows, and remember that you don't count the cast on as one of those 45 rows. Now, once you've done all your rows and you knit off, you're ready for, ta-da, the cast off. To be more precise, we're going to be doing the flat drawstring cast off, and we're going to use one strand at a time. Let me show you how. First, take your working yarn and you're going to wrap it around the loom at least 1, and you can either do 1.5 or 1.25. Depending on what you feel comfortable with. I do almost 1.5 times around the loom, and then get your scissors and cut the working yarn, and then come back to the beginning where your working yarn is, and we're going to be using, like I said, one strand at a time. So separate your 2 strands of yarn. You're going to take the first one and put it under the existing loop, and with your hook scoop up and feed your working yarn through that first loop that's on peg 1 and pull it completely through. And then you're going to take the working yarn behind peg 2, leave it there, bring it forward to peg 3, take the hook, and from the bottom scoop up and feed the yarn completely through. Then go behind the next peg, which is 4, and come back forward and put the working yarn under peg 5 and scoop it up. And basically what you're doing is you're taking the yarn behind one peg, bringing it forward to the other peg and feeding it through. So you're feeding the working yarn through every other peg. All right, until you get all the way to your last peg. And for my 41 peg loom, I will be going behind peg 40 and feeding the working yarn through peg 41. So starting with peg 1, you will have fed the working yarn through every other peg. You see? Every other one has it. So the ones that you did feed through, take those loops off the peg. So this one doesn't have working yarn, this one does. You take this loop off the peg, you leave the next one on, and then go to the next one and take it. So you're skipping every other peg. All of the ones that you did not feed the working yarn through, you leave those loops on the peg, because if you take them off right now, they'll get unraveled. So the ones that you fed the working yarn through the loop, those loops are secured. Okay, what we're doing is we're going to be creating 2 layers of cast off. So that one will be at the bottom and the other one will be at the top, and it'll create a flatter top. It won't be perfect because you have a lot of yarn that you're using for this project, but it will be a lot better than if you didn't do this. So you're done with one strand, and now you get the other one, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to start by going behind peg 1 this time, bringing it in front of peg 2 and feeding the working yarn through it, going behind peg 3, bringing the working yarn in front of peg 4 and scooping it up. And you're basically doing the same process, this time with the loops that are still on the peg. This will be the top layer. And you'll see what I mean once we go to close this up. You'll see how it works in 2 layers. This was created by a designer that right now I cannot remember her name. But it works super good, and having 2 separate strands makes it work even better, because it actually is a little complicated when there's only one. So now you've got, again, the loops over, you've worked the working yarn through them. Now they're all done. You can go ahead and take those loops off of the pegs in order to release your project from the loom. So as you can see, I'm taking all of them off. There you go. And now your project is free from the loom. And the next thing that you want to do, and this is important, is to stretch your stitches. They are not going to look the same if you don't do this process. This is important. You can tell the difference. See the difference between the ones that are done and the ones that are stretched and the ones that are not stretched. So throughout this project, every time you're finished with one piece of the project, when you take it off the loom, this is the first thing you're going to do. You're going to stretch those stitches, all of it, so your fabric will look really nice. You see? There you go. Now we're going to knit the next piece, which is the nose. And for this part, we're going to, again, use 2 strands of yarn, and we're going to knit flat, which means we go back and forth. We're going to do a drawstring cast on of 9 pegs and knit 9 rows. So get your 2 strands of yarn and secure them to the anchor peg. I'm doing a basic knot. You can do a slip knot if you're more comfortable, and you can go in either direction. I'm going left to right, and then we're going to go just like before, in and out in that zigzag technique, right, to drawstring those 9 pegs. And as you can see, just like before, it's every other peg, but this time we're knitting flat, so we're going back and forth instead of going in the round like we did before, which means we're going to take the working yarn and head back in the opposite direction. Take your hook and those 2 loops that are under, knit them off, right? You're going to skip that next peg and knit the next one, because you're knitting only the pegs that have loops on the top and the bottom. Peg 1 does not have loops on the top and the bottom, so you're just going to basically wrap that peg. It's like a figure 8, because now you're heading in the opposite direction. So you wrap peg 1 and then come back forward, and now we're going to knit row 1, and again we're using the U-wrap, so we half wrap the peg and knit off. And we're starting with peg 2 again, because peg 1 only had 1 loop. It didn't have 2, right? And so now you're just using that U-wrap knit stitch to knit your pegs. On this first row, you're only knitting 8 because one of them didn't have 2 loops. And now again, just like before, you're going to turn around and you're going to knit that peg 9. So you're knitting in both directions. You're knitting that peg, right? Now you're heading back towards peg 1. Now you'll notice that I did not skip a peg when I turn. I'm knitting all 9 rows, and sometimes you're asked to do that in order to have a cleaner edge. On this piece, you don't need to do that. Another thing is to remember to take the knot off the anchor peg after about 2 or 3 rows. If you leave that on, it will mess with your fabric. So go ahead and take that off. Now, keep in mind that you are knitting 9 rows, and that those rows do not include the cast on. So when you're counting your rows, you start with row 1 after cast on, and then that's how you're going to count your rows from this point on. After you've done your 9 rows of 9 pegs, you're then ready for the cast off, and we're going to drawstring cast off all 9 pegs using both strands of yarn. So take that working yarn in the opposite direction, lay it loosely over about 10 or 12 pegs, and then with your scissors cut that working yarn. And now we're going to do that drawstring cast on starting with peg 9. From the bottom up, you're going to scoop your yarn, your working yarn, and feed it completely through each peg in a row. Unlike last time, you're not skipping any. You're going to do this all in one sweep. Just scoop up and feed the working yarn completely through all 9 of your pegs. And once you have all 9 pegs with the working yarn through them, then just take your hook and take the loops off of the pegs. Once you finish taking all of the loops off the peg and your fabric is free from the loom, you're going to go ahead and stretch those stitches. Try to do it as best as you can, and then take your fabric and put it to the side for later. We're then ready to start on the next piece, which actually you need to make two of, and that's your ears. This time we're going to be using only one strand of yarn, and we're going to knit flat. You can go in either direction, and we're going to drawstring cast on 12 pegs and knit 17 rows. So go ahead and get your working yarn. You're using one strand again. You're going to secure it to the anchor peg, and then you can go in either direction, but you're going to use that zigzag technique. And when you get to peg 12, turn around, and you're going to, with your hook, knit off every peg that has 2 loops. You guys know how to do this drawstring cast on, I'm sure. Get to peg 1, you're going to wrap it and turn around, and now using that U-wrap version of the knit stitch, you're going to knit all of your pegs. And while you guys knit, I want to give a special thank you to Lorena Reese for her continued support of this channel. Thank you so much, my friend. All right, guys, and as we continue to knit, remember you're going to turn around, knit that peg 12 again, and then just keep knitting. You're knitting flat, so you're knitting back and forth, not in the round, and you're only using 12 of your pegs, right? And as always, I want you to remember to take that knot off your peg once you have a few rows, because you don't need to secure your yarn after 2 or 3 rows, right? And then it's just a matter of knitting your 17 rows, and when you're done, take the working yarn and go back towards about 13-14 pegs and cut the working yarn, and now we're going to cast off. So with your hook, you're going to scoop up and take the working yarn through every single peg, all of them, because we're doing that drawstring cast off. You guys are already so familiar with, because you've done so many pieces with this drawstring cast off, right? Once you've fed the yarn through all of your pegs, then you, with your hook, you're going to take the loops off the pegs in order to release that yarn, and you know that you need to stretch those stitches for your fabric to look great. And then you're just going to put it along with the rest of them, put it aside, and we're going to move on to the next project. To the next piece, which is that back part, that pocket. For that one, we're going to drawstring cast on 20 pegs and knit 20 rows, and then drawstring cast off those 20 pegs. You guys already know how to do every one of those instructions, but let me walk you through it. You're going to secure your 2 strands of yarn to an anchor peg, and then in either direction, go ahead and do the drawstring cast on. So you're going to zigzag through those 20 pegs, and when you get to peg 20, you're going to turn around, wrap, and go in the opposite direction. Lay the yarn over a few of the pegs, and then knit off every peg that has loops on the top and on the bottom. Again, this is basically a review, because you guys already know how to do this. When you get back to peg 1, you turn around. You're heading in the opposite direction because you're knitting flat. And with peg 2, you're going to start knitting using the U-wrap version of the knit stitch. Again, you can use the flat or either one of them. And then when you're done, just take the working yarn and go over at least, you know, a few extra pegs and cut the working yarn, and then with the hook, starting from the bottom, scoop up and feed those 2 working yarns through all of your pegs. So through all 20 of them, you're going to feed the working yarn through every one of those pegs, and you're going to use both strands of yarn for this. And just, you know, you don't need to do this piece, right? This is just that optional extra pocket in the back in case you want to store a few extra things. All right, once you're done feeding the working yarn through those loops, all of them, with your hook, you're going to take the loops off of the pegs, all 20 of them, to release the fabric from the knitting loom. And just like we've been doing with every other piece, with this one as well, when you get it off the loom, you're going to go ahead and stretch those stitches. And remember, stuff is just not going to look right if you don't do this step, so don't skip it. And then you're going to take that piece and put it along with the rest of them, and at this point in total you should have 5 pieces: the head, 2 ears, a nose, and a pocket. Alright guys, well, assembly is required, so get your needle because it's time to sew. I'm going to start with the head first, and to be more specific, I'm going to start with the cast on. And I know it's the cast on because of course you see both strands are together, and you might find that as you pull, it's not going as easily, so you might have to pull those stitches a little bit, as you can see. So you can just continue to pull really strong. It may not close completely because there is a lot of yarn here, so separate your strands and get your needle. I'm going to be using a metal needle, which is actually your best option when you're doing these kind of projects, but your plastic one will work fine. It's just the metal ones work better. And as you can see, I skip some of the loops when I'm going to go close the little hole on the top. You can clearly see those initial loops, and I'm going to be sewing in a circular manner, and I'm skipping a few of those loops as I sew and pull to try to close the top. And by the way, this is actually works really good when you knit those hats and you're using 2 strands of yarn at one time. And a lot of you have issues trying to close these up. Well, your best effort, your best bet is to use just one of the strands and knit from the top, the very top. You knit and pull, and you see that it starts to close really well. I would go around at least 3 to 4 times, and always skipping some of the loops in order to close this tight. You see that every now and then I'm skipping a few of them, and then you get kind of this star looking top. You know, it can flatten out a little bit if you like steam block, but it's always going to have a little bit of a wrinkle, right? Unless you decrease your crown, and this works really well with the way we closed it with that flat drawstring cast off. Is going to be a little bit better, not a lot, but a little bit better. All right, so once you're done, go ahead and make a knot and cut your strands off. You can do this from the inside, but I'm not going to. And then you need at least 3 ounces of stuffing, which is approximately 85 grams of polyfill, or in my case, I'm just recycling an old pillow that I had of my husband's, which I never liked anyway. So I'm just recycling and using the stuffing from that pillow to fill this head so that it doesn't go to waste. Yeah, it was a funky pillow anyway. All right, so here we are on the flat cast off, and you can see the 2 layers. Remember I told you there's 2 parts, right? Because you separated your strands and you did it differently. So try to find the top one and pull and close that one first. And just like the other one, it's not going to close completely. So just close as much as you can, and you know, massage the stuffing into shape as much as you can, and close this first layer as much as you can. The important one is the second layer, because you see that that's the one that needs to be closed. So once you've closed that as much as possible, get your needle and let's thread the needle with that 1 strand of yarn, which was again that top layer of the 2 from the flat drawstring cast on. And now, just like before, we're going to sew in a circular manner, and just like before, I'm going to skip a few of them as I sew. And be sure to sew in the correct direction, because you want to close this up, you don't want to open it. So when you go to sew that bottom, you're sewing through the loops, you're skipping a few of them, and you're making sure that you're going in the correct direction. And you'll know that you're going in the correct direction because the little hole is closing. If it's not closing, there's an issue. You're sewing probably in the wrong direction. All right, so you sew and you pull and you sew and you pull until it's completely closed. And just like before, like I said, I'm skipping a few of the loops as I sew, and then I'm gonna make a knot, pull on it as tight as I can, and then I made 2 knots. I get my scissors and I cut off the yarn, and then I have to massage this because you want it to be shaped correctly. In fact, I take my needle and I make sure that some of the stuffing, the polyfill or whatever you use to stuff your little head, I poke it with the needle to try to massage it and poke it until it's the right shape. And then you need to decide which one do you want as the top of the head. If you plan to add hair, it doesn't really matter, and I have a few videos on how to add hair to a doll head, and I'll put a link in the description. Your next step then is to find the middle where you're going to put your nose. So I go and from the top and the bottom, and I find my middle and I put a little pin, which is going to help me to know where to put my nose, and I just add a few just to make sure that it's situated. Plus I kind of want to test what I'm going to do, so I'll add the ears with some pins as well, and make sure that they line up because you don't want your glasses to end up kind of cockeyed, and if your ears are not perfectly lined up, then your glasses will look like this, kind of like offset. So you want to line up your ears as best as possible, and you can always use a measuring tape. The next thing I'm gonna sew are the ears, and they are the trickiest. So I put my pins in place to kind of help me figure out where I'm gonna place them, and then you're gonna take the top and the bottom and pull on the working yarn to shape your ears. There are 2 ways that you can put these ears on. I prefer to do it this way, but you can fold it in the other direction and it'll give you some bigger, longer ears. That's one way to put it. I just happen to like my ears to be a little, I don't know what to call it, chubbier, and so I don't fold this way. I prefer to fold in the other direction. See how these are longer and thinner? This gives me a what I call a chubbier ear, so I prefer to shape them in that way. And then I'm just gonna put each tip where the little pin is. As you can see, that's the placement for the ears. That helps me to figure out where I'm gonna put them. So then I take my needle and I'm gonna put the working yarn through the loops. I'm gonna do this on the top and the bottom, and that's gonna help me create the shape of the ears that I'm looking for. Again, this one is a little different from the other method, so you can figure out which one works best for you. But for me, I like this one. So I go to the other end of the ear and take what is actually my drawstring cast on and my cast off, and this is a way to secure your project, your piece. And then I just start sewing the ear. I start at the front, and you could sew however is more comfortable for you. I just tend to I start at the middle and then go up towards the tip, right? But you can, as long as the ear gets on the head, you could do it however you feel more comfortable. So I'm going to use one of the strands in one direction in the front. I'm sewing the front, and I'm going upwards towards the top of the ear. And then once I finish this and I have it at the tip, you see how the tip of the ear on the top is right where the pin was. That's why your pins are there to to kind of help you, if necessary, to stretch your fabric so that it is the size that you want your ear to be. This is flexible, you know, don't overthink it. If you overthink it, you're gonna have a problem. And I know that every now and then I go off camera, but I'm just sewing, folks. You know, it's not surgical. You know, so don't freak out because I go off camera every now and then. Sometimes when I'm working behind the camera and I get a little too intense in what I'm doing, I don't notice that I'm off camera. I just don't have the same setting that I used to have where I could see myself on the camera like I used to. I have a different setup right now, temporarily. So every now and then I go off camera, and I apologize. But you can see basically what I'm doing, right? I am now on the back part of the ear and just sewing my way down. And again, trying to keep it stretched out so that it's exactly where my pin placement is. And now I'm as I continue to sew, if your working yarn is short, you know, like you end up with not having enough, just pick up the next one. You actually have two, the cast on and the cast off working yarn. And you can even, and I'll show you this later, you can even just add some yarn if you run out while you're sewing. You just basically take the yarn back inside of the project so it's hidden, and then just use another piece of yarn. You could do that. It's no big deal. You know, it's not going to come off. See how I ran out of enough yarn here? I'm not going to sweat that. All right, and always verify that your ear is going in the right direction. It's going where you want it to be. So see, I put the needle in because I don't have enough yarn. So I put the needle in first, then thread the needle and pull the working yarn through, and then just cut that extra yarn. And then I just get a piece of thread that's left over from when I closed the top of the head. And then I just keep sewing, and I'll hide it in the project later on. But that's what I'm saying. You know, don't worry that you ran out of yarn, working yarn, and you're not done sewing any part of the project. Just pick up another one and start. And if you're sewing, you know, this is not a kid's toy. So you don't have to worry that, oh my God, it's going to fall apart if I don't make knots and, you know, go through all those changes. You're sewing enough where it's not going to come apart. The thread is not going to come out. All right, so once you're done with one ear, don't forget you need a second ear. You have to sew that other one on, but you see that the shape, like I said, is a little chunkier than if I had done it in the other method. All right, so there's my ear, my other ear, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to close it on the top and the bottom, the cast on and cast off, and then place it where I want. And then I'm ready to go on to the nose. Just like the ears, we're going to pull on the cast on and cast off strands of yarn, right? And there's two on each side. So you're going to separate them because you're just going to use one strand at a time. So get one and put it on your needle and feed that strand through those loops. This is going to help to secure your yarn and to shape the fabric into a little round nose. And just to make sure that it has the shape that you're wanting, we're going to put some stuffing in the nose before sewing it on. This keeps the shape, which is a nice rounded shape. Don't overdo the stuffing because you don't want it to show through. You just want just enough so that it keeps its shape no matter what. And then just place it right where you have put the pin, And make sure that it's lined up with the ears, because remember that this nose holds those glasses in place. That's another reason why you want to stuff this little nose, because it's actually what holds your glasses along with the ears. So if you don't stuff this, it's not going to have enough weight to it in order to handle the glasses, right? So you want to put enough so that it keeps the shape and it has some strength, but not so much that your stuffing will show through. And for that, you're going to have to, like, figure it out. Once you put it in, take a look and see that everything is okay. And once you have your little nose in place, you've sewn the top and the bottom, then just cut the excess yarn and, test your little guy, make sure everything is in place and it looks the way you want it to. See? Really, those 4 pieces are your most important, and then you're going to do the same thing as you have been doing. Is you were pulling on the top and bottom for the pocket section of the project. I'm not going to show you sewing on here, only because you've already seen how I sew my parts. What I want you to pay attention to is how I shape the pocket. And that is that I pull on those drawstrings, the cast on and the cast off. And you see that it looks nice and neat, right? You wanna sew on the sides and the bottom, but not the top, because the top needs to stay open, right? So you're gonna sew right here and down at the bottom and on both sides. The top, you want to leave it so that it stays open, but you want to pull on the strings so that they're nice and tight. And then that's it. Your little guy is done. You can put your glasses on him and take a look and admire your handiwork, because you've done a super job, Loomer. Now you can add hair or, eyes and, pin cushions or whatever you want to do. And in fact, you can add safety eyes, or like I did here, I used embroidery floss for this eye. And for the pocket, just remember to leave the top open and only sew the sides and the bottom. And you can even add a base for it, a little wooden base, or whatever you want. And then for the one with the mask, you do need to add more rows. Like I said before, you could see the difference. I added 7 extra rows to the blue one with the mask. And this guy, I wanted to make him kind of cool, so I added a mustache. You can do so many things to these to make them personal. Add a mohawk, whatever. Make them wild, crazy. Turn them to monsters or dragons or, whatever. They are so easy to customize and make them super fun. So I hope you guys like this project as much as I did, and please come back. Don't forget to comment and share the video, because it helps me a lot. All right, guys, stay safe until we loom again.